Oh.
All right. So you chose to go to Bowling Green. Did you?
Yeah, I got admitted to Bowling Green because they had to take me because at that time, any state school, if you applied to a state school, they had to admit you.
Was that the only one you applied to?
Yeah. Why did I go there?
Yeah.
Because it wasn't Ohio State, and I don't mean that in a bad way. Ohio State was just too big. When I started at Bowling Green, there were about 6,000 students, and it seemed like you knew everybody on campus and that, and I think that's why I went there. And besides that, it was cheaper than Miami of Ohio, and some of the other schools. It was one of the, didn't cost as much as some of the other state colleges. State colleges did not all cost the same, and that. But I didn't go to Ohio State because it was too big. Didn't even think about it.
What'd you major in?
I was a health and physical education major with a minor in biology. I was supposed to be a teacher and coach. And that. So then I was there until 1965, and in 1965, and while I was in school, the nice thing was I started working for Scott's in high school, which guaranteed you. My neighbor was C.B. Mills, who was chairman of the board of Scott's. And if you got on a Scott's in high school, which was kind of like catching the brass ring, gold ring as you went on a merry-go-round, if you did that, you were guaranteed a job every summer while you were going to school. So I did that.
Is that what you did in the summers?
Huh?
Between in college?
Well, in high school, my senior year in high school, right after my senior year in high school, I worked on the Marysville golf course. And then from there, I went in and worked in the Scott Labs and on their turf plots, mowing, counting grass seeds. The worst job I ever had at Scott's was one summer looking through a microscope all day, separating seeds. I hated it. And the best job was when I was outside. The best job was when I spent one summer at Bowling Green, because Scott's was contracted to put in their new golf course and football stadium turf, and I got to work up there for Scott's doing that, and that was fantastic. That's all I did. And then to move it along, then in 1965 got out and was hired by Scott's full time. I was offered a job to go with them full time in sales, which I did. And of course I knew at the time that it was going to be just a short time before I was in the military, because at that time Vietnam was going on, and they didn't have a lot. You've heard of the draft, and back then everybody was drafted. You didn't have a lottery. That was before they had a draft lottery. Most people, when you talk about the draft, they think of a draft lottery where they drew numbers like in bingo, and if your birth date came, month and date, came up a certain way, then if you got a real high number, you knew that you were pretty much not going to be drafted. But for myself, you knew you were going to be drafted. If you were in school, you were 2S, what was classified 2S, and you could either be married or in school. Those were the two exemptions of not being drafted if you were over the age of 18. So as soon as you left school, you became 1A, and of course I did not continue in ROTC at Bowling Green, because if you went to a state school at that time, you had to be in ROTC, You had no choice for a minimum of 2 years. And of course, my dad, working at Wright-Patterson, wanted me to be in the Air Force ROTC, which I was, which it's not nice to say they asked me to leave because you know, sometimes when you put a uniform on a little guy, what I call LMS, little man syndrome, and there was this kid on campus there that was in ROTC that wore his uniform to bed, I think. He loved the military. And he was some kind of IG or something, and he was always giving people crap all the time. I mean, in their face crap. When I'm talking about in their face, I'm talking about like this. And he did that to me one time, and I told him to back up, and if he didn't back up, and I was different then, if he didn't back up, I was going to kick his ass. And so the next day he came and did it again, and I proceeded to do that. And they said, now this is the irony of it. We're talking about the military, and they said, we're going to give you a B and ask you to leave the ROTC program for fighting. And I thought that's what the military did. But, you know, he quit picking on a lot of people, they said. You know, he kind of got the message that these weren't real, you know, ROTC was not real military. I'm sorry. But anyways, so after I got, I knew I wasn't going to last long. I lasted until...
But wait, before you got out of college,
yeah,
weren't you engaged to someone else?
I don't remember.
Mom, what do you want to tell about that?
I've been married now for 42 years. It'll be 43 years in April. And after you've been married that long, you don't remember. And you're a lot smarter if you don't remember. So I don't know. I can't remember.
Her name was Cynthia.
I don't know how she remembers, but I don't remember that. But anyways, so I was working at Scott's, traveling around the United States, and I'm dumb, but I'm not stupid. I mean, you know, there are certain things you don't talk about, and all of a sudden, of course, you knew what they called the Selective Service Registrar, and it was Pearl Rupright, and she was a real nice lady, and she called me in February and she said, Jim, your number's going to be up in April. You're going to be gone. And so I got my magic letter inviting me to join the military in March, and said I was supposed to report for a physical, I forget what date it was. Yeah, I forget what date it was, but it was like the end of March, and you had to get on a bus and go to Columbus, all of us that were going at the same time. So we got on a bus and we went to Columbus, and I remember I'd had knee operations from playing ball, and so had Jim Lowry, and we both had the same type of knees. He went in one door to see the doctors, and I went in a different door to see the doctors. He came out the other side, and they told him his knees weren't good enough to be in the military, and I came out the other side and they told me mine were. So
you picked the wrong door.
I picked the wrong door. I was either in front or behind, I don't know which. And I thought I did not know that they drafted for the Marines at that time. I thought the only thing they ever drafted for was the Army. And when I came out, they said, today we are drafting for the Army or Marines. Which would you like?
Oh, God.
And of course, without laughing out loud, I was laughing inside, going, Marines, that's where they give you real rifles, and they go and shoot people, and that. So I don't want any part of that. So I guess I'll take Army. And so I was drafted into the Army and was inducted on April 6th at Fort Knox, Kentucky, which is just outside of Louisville. And that's where I spent basic training, which...
You said April 6th, what year?
Oh, 1966. Yeah, that sounds like a long time ago, wasn't it? And went to basic training, and as most people remember their basic training, it was very tough with all the forced marches and, you know, not campouts, but bivouacs and things like that, and going through pure hell. However, in my unit...
And this is at Fort Knox?
Is the Fort Knox.
And were you part of the Army that stopped Goldfinger's master plan there?
No. I was part of the Army that gave a Goldfinger to most people that would go by. But hidden, of course, because my philosophy when I went in the military was, you can mess with my body, but not my mind. Because you found that, well, one thing you learned to do, first of all, in the military was learn to cuss real well. Because every other word had to be a cuss word, or you did not understand the English language. And so you learned to do that real well. I was the oldest one in the unit of all these draftees. Most of them were kids. I was the oldest. So I got to be the class leader just because of my age, and I'd been through school, which then got me out of a lot of things, which I was very fortunate. I also, for some reason, got to play some baseball when I was at basic. The other thing was...
Did you play baseball in high school?
Oh yeah, yeah, and at Bowling Green. And
on the Bowling Green baseball team?
Yeah. Matter of fact, when was it? About a month ago, I sent an old uniform back to Bowling Green. Or how long ago was that?
Maybe a year.
A year ago, I had a uniform from my freshman year that was, when I looked at it, I got to thinking, this doesn't even match Bowling Green. Never thought of it, of course, when I was a freshman, because it was, of course, all wool, and it was BGSU, but BGSU was in maroon.
I remember that.
Remember that shirt?
I absolutely remember it, yeah.
And I called Mickey Cochran, who was former soccer coach. He was a soccer coach when I was there, and he's head of the archives at Bowling Green. And I told Mickey what I had, and would he be interested in having it for that? And he said, "Oh God, yes." He said, "This is the first I've ever heard of one like that." And so I sent it up to them, and so I imagine it's on display at Bowling Green. But anyways, basic training is supposed to last 8 weeks, and you're supposed to march everywhere. However, because, quote, ROTC, the Army ROTC, was coming in for their summer camp, we had to be out of there early because they needed the barracks. So we rode buses to all of our training things. We didn't march anywhere. I'm sorry, but my Army days were, I can't complain too much. We rode buses every place. We didn't have any forced marches up and down what they called the hills there at Fort Knox. They had two of them they called Misery and Agony. I got to miss those. And we got out of basic training in 6 weeks instead of 8. I have a little trophy and paper at home where I was the honor graduate for that unit of my unit for basic training. And at that time, then the order, I remember they sent me over, and they were very shocked because you take this, it's a written and a practical test, of what you've learned in the military that I think a sixth grader could pass, and I didn't miss anything on it. Of going through all the stations, didn't miss anything on that, and on the written part, didn't miss anything, and they were just astounded. And I was just going, well, this is pretty thing. So I got out of the end of training early and was helping teach, if you can believe this, people how to learn to read that were in the military, that were drafted. And we had one guy, it shows how it wasn't fair. I could see people like me that was single and that, but you know, you weren't supposed to draft people who were married. And I was making $74 a month, and as you went through the line, you had to give so much of it to the Red Cross. They were at the end of the line collecting. And so a guy by the name of Whitaker from Kentucky came to me, and he had been the sole support of his parents and his wife and his 2 kids, and he got drafted. Don't ask me how. And he was going to go AWOL, which is absent without leave, because he got a letter they had no food or anything at home. And he came to me, because I was class leader, and said, you know, he was going to go. So I says, no, don't do that, because all that's going to do is get you thrown in jail, or what we called the brig. And so went over to First Sergeant, and so we went to the Red Cross, because, you know, we were giving every month. They were taking from us money, you know, and we figured that would really be good. And they turned us down, which tended to upset me somewhat. So then we got in touch with, again, you've heard me say this before, got in touch with the Salvation Army, and we got notice that they did take clothes and food and everything in for his family, and they were taking care of him. And we had a captain that was our CO of the basic unit, who was probably one of the best officers I'd ever met. He was out of West Point, and he didn't screw with you. He was just a fair, straight shooting person. And he said, this boy has no business being in the military. He shouldn't be here with family like that to take care of being drafted. If he'd enlisted, that's another thing. That's doing it on his own choice. That was what was called an RA, regular Army. We were US, and that's where your serial number started. If it started with an RA, that meant you enlisted and you were in for 3 years. If you were US, that meant you were drafted, you were in for 2. And he did get him an honorable discharge from the Army immediately, and to go home. And I remember him doing that, and I thought that was pretty nice of him. But then after that, then you're supposed to go to AIT, which is Advanced Individual Training, which my order, first they send you over and you talk to some kid that's about 19 years old, and he interviews you and tells you what you're going to be in the Army. And he interviewed me, and he thought I would be good for the Quartermaster Corps in supply. And I told him, I said, well, I can sure tell that you're not qualified to be in human resources, because you have no idea what you're talking about. And so I left there, and then I got orders. The orders came, and it was posted, and it said I was going to go to Fort Bliss, Texas. I go, where in the hell is Fort Bliss, Texas? So I asked Sergeant Labby, my platoon sergeant, and he goes, I don't know. So we went in and looked up where, and it was in El Paso. So I said, well, what am I going down for? He says, for radar training for missiles. I go, oh, okay. So came home, and
what'd your mom and dad say about all this? Or
what do you mean?
What did they think about you being in the Army? I mean, did they ever say?
Well, let me put it this way. If I would have been drafted and I would have taken off for Canada or refused the draft, as some people did at that time, or become a draft card burner, which later became popular after I was in. I think it would have been easier fighting the Vietnamese than fighting my father. Okay?
But did they say they were proud of you?
Oh, I don't think they ever said that. I think it was what I call an unannounced norm, that it was your duty to do it because that was the law and that's what you should do. My dad spent over 2 years in the military, and if we were in this, quote, it was never called a war but a conflict, and the government said we were having a draft, then you go. You don't try to find some way to get out of it.
Now, was your brother drafted or enlisted?
No, my brother enlisted in the Marines. Yeah, that was I was 4 years older than he was. I was out of the military. No, I was not out of the military. Was I out of the military when he enlisted?
Yeah, he was already in. I'm pretty sure.
No. Matter of fact, I was in the military when he enlisted, because he graduated in '66 from high school, and he went in the military a year later, which would have been '67, which I didn't get out until '68. So yeah, he joined the Marines.
Okay, let's stop.